Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Some late night massive news for the Oklahoma Sooner fans coming out of the transfer portal. Is one of the more coveted edge rushers available in the portal. Caiden Woullard coming over from Miami of Ohio, commits to Oklahoma. Dill, I know you watched a little Caiden Woullard. Very impressed at what he could do against the Miami Hurricanes earlier in this 2023 season. But I want to focus on what Brent Venables is doing, just building a massive pass rush unit. And that's been the goal, right? Going back to last year's transfer portal cycle, Brent Venables has put an emphasis at winning the line of scrimmage, creating negative plays, creating sacks. He did it in the transfer portal last cycle. He certainly did it in the 2024 class, bringing in guys like Nigel Smith and David Stone. And he's doing it again in this transfer portal. More is not enough for Brent Venables on that defensive line. Another massive gap. Before we get into Caiden Woullard, just want to say thank you to you guys. There has been just an overwhelming amount of support from the Oklahoma fans as we've covered all these commitments from the transfer portal. Cannot thank you guys enough. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And Dill, I'm going to kick this one off to you. Watching a little film back on Caiden Woullard. Tell us what we're getting here.
I mean, I think the thing that jumps off most to you is like a very explosive edge rusher, and that like to pair up with some of the more heavy-handed guys that Oklahoma has, like an Ethan Downs, I think that's a really interesting kind of promise, if you will, because that's what jumps to me is A, he gets on the edge really effectively, but B, when he gets into guys, he gets into them. I mean, you go back and watch that Miami game, you kind of see his physicality and like his explosiveness off the ball. That was a lot to handle for Francis Marino, I should say, a true freshman right tackle who's a stud and a physical freak. But you could kind of see his physicality or his explosiveness was very much a problem.
The thing I see the most, and this is something that you can't teach, and I know you mentioned before we went live here that you think there's a little bit more meat left on the bone in terms of what he can be as a pass rusher. What I love most about him, and something you can't teach. So you can get him in, you can put weight on him, you can get him faster. You can't teach arm length. Caiden Woullard, 6'5", 250 pounds, length for days with the arms. And you get him under Todd Bates, you teach him a little bit more technique and how to use those arms, excuse me. I mean, this is a guy that you could see being a very high upside pass rusher for the Oklahoma.
And that's the big thing for me. It's like when you talk about like meat on the bone and like development left, it's like as much as his punch was good and he stunned guys and that's frankly the hard part. Because if you can't do that, you can't shed blocks. But I didn't think, especially in the run game against some of the bigger tackles, I mean, he didn't always get off blocks as well as I think he could, given his athleticism. And same thing with the pass, frankly. It just having that kind of secondary move once you extend the guy out and get your hands on him, like what do you do after it? I think that's where I think you can make the biggest jumps. And you kind of look at his stats. He didn't really have a ton of tackles. He had a lot of sacks at 9.5, but not a ton of tackles. I think he can be far more productive in the run and far more productive in terms of getting sacks, not just being able to kind of create havoc by pushing pockets.
I agree with you in terms of what he can do against the run, because I see a guy that can be physical in terms of establishing the edge, stacking and shedding blocks, and I'm most excited to see what he can do in the run game. Now, the pass rush, phenomenal in the pass. Again, 9.5 sacks, 42 quarterback hurries. I mean, this was a guy that disrupted pockets routinely at Miami of Ohio, but with all that length, I think he could be an animal in the run game as well. And Dill, you start to project what this edge rusher group looks like for Oklahoma. I mean, PJ Adebawore, we think he's going to be an absolute stud going into year two. R. Mason Thomas, when you saw a healthy R. Mason Thomas, he was a force. Now you have a guy like Ethan Downs, who you know what you get, and a heavy-handed guy that can get it done in the pass rush as well. Caiden Woullard added to that group. That is four, stud edge rushers. Most of those guys starting on most Power 5 teams, and that's something we've talked about, right? Brent Venables, especially being against or an opposite of an offense that runs so fast and runs so many plays, it puts some stress on the defense. And you have to have the depth up front to play a lot of plays for Oklahoma. Brent Venables has put a very strong emphasis on not only grabbing talent, but keeping that unit deep. And you look towards 2024, it looks like that unit's going to be pretty damn deep as well.
Yeah, especially because last year I felt like they were very reliant on Bothroyd and Downs at the end of the day.
They played a lot of ball.
A lot of football. In Downs, again, high motor guy, didn't feel like he slowed down a whole lot. But you're kind of right. You want to keep guys fresh. You see the really good defensive units, especially those defensive line units, be able to go 2 to 3 deep. And now again, I think with the kind of progress you're starting to see from Adibari and our Mason Thomas, you're starting to see two guys who I think should have very productive seasons, should be able to be counted on a lot more than they were this year. And then you add Caiden Woullard into the mix. You have 4 guys now. You're looking, that should be a really good unit. They should be able to keep guys fresh and be more disruptive than they were at times last year.
And that's what Brent Venables wants this defense to look like. And when he took over from Lincoln Riley and Alex Grinch, and we talked about this when we were talking about the defensive coordinator hire, there's a stark difference in terms of what Alex Grinch and Lincoln Riley wanted to do on defense and what Brent Venables did. And yes, there were some growing pains, and there had to be a kind of transformation in terms of the personnel that was on this defensive line. Brent Venables does not want to play a laid-back defense where we're going to try to bow up and stop you in the red zone and stop you from getting 3 points. This is a defense that wants to smother you. And when you look at elite defenses across the country, it starts up front, right? Georgia being kind of the blueprint there. When you have a secondary that, and I think this was most evident in that Arizona game, where Arizona was picking Oklahoma apart in the back end, right? They really had a tough time dealing with that talent and that wide receiver room. When Arizona's offense stopped humming, it was solely because of that front seven, that defensive line impacting the quarterback, impacting pockets. When you have a defensive line that can be as dominant as Oklahoma's might be in 2024, it solves a lot of problems on the defensive side of the football.
Yeah, and that is how you're kind of right. That's how Venables has always solved his problems. I mean, Clemson was always
aggression. We're gonna punch
it. Very good defensive line, a very aggressive scheme with their linebackers as well, and then opportunistic players in the secondary who would go take the ball away when they got the shot. And you got guys like Billy Bowman who are really good ball hawks, and when they get their chance to take it away, they take it away. So it is built up front. They want to be aggressive. They want to create havoc on teams, and then have those secondary guys who have good instincts and catch the ball and capitalize on those opportunities.
Now, there's one other position group that when we talked about it, and we've talked a lot of Oklahoma in terms of wish list and portal players that they should be going after. The defensive line you knew was going to be a target for Brent Venables, whether they needed defensive lineman or they didn't. They were going to get some defensive linemen in there. Dill, that one position that you're looking at for Oklahoma and saying we need to make sure it's right heading into 2024, that offensive line, right? At the end of the day, you have Jackson Arnold going into year 2. You want to make it. He's going to have some weapons. I'm really high on what Oklahoma has, especially adding a guy like Deion Burks, getting Andrew Anthony back from injury. That wide receiver room has a chance to be special, has a chance to be a problem. You want to make sure Jackson Arnold's protected. And it's really hard to find starting caliber offensive tackle in the transfer portal. You've seen Oklahoma go out and get a guy like Spencer Brown. Sounds like they're making a run at Michael Tarkin too. And it sounds like we could be talking about Michael Tarkin committing to the Sooners within the next couple of days. A guy that we followed since he was at Florida, then went to USC. Dill, a guy in Michael Tarkin would be massive for Oklahoma because at the very least, you know you're getting a solid offensive tackle here.
Well, and that's really what's kind of left for Oklahoma at this point. I'd be really surprised if they went and added a lot of other guys. I mean, they've recruited really well through that program. Most spots are very deep. That is the one point you look at, especially following that Arizona game. Like, you got to have some guys to push everybody because it's just been. I mean, there's some guys who look like they're going to be good players, as we've talked about. I feel like they should like what they have in Sexton and some of the other guys that they have, but they need somebody to, again, be there at least to push guys. If
you don't want to be, you don't want to be relying on like Eugene Brooks and Daniel Akinkunmi to come in as true freshmen and start in the SEC as freshmen in college. And so you have the opportunity to get a guy that might as well mention Michael Tarkin during that 2022 season for the Florida Gators as a starting tackle in the SEC was phenomenal. Now he goes to USC, battles through some injuries, wasn't as good of a football player, I thought, as he was in 2022. You go back to that 2022 film, like that's a starting caliber tackle that you feel comfortable out trotting out in the SEC. So what you said, you're kind of just raising that floor of what this tackle position can be heading into 2024.
And that'll be the big thing. I think that's the one position that's left, and be really surprised if they didn't get somebody.
And I agree. They've been going after guys, and Michael Tarkin kind of emerged late in this process. He's kind of flying under the radar, and I keep up with the Oklahoma beat writers and kind of know who's on campus. Didn't Tarkman. This would be a massive commitment for Oklahoma. We'll cover it when it happens, if it happens. Sooner fans, cannot thank you guys enough for rocking with the boys again. The amount of support you guys show, it means a lot. We appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.